Good morning, Stuart, Florida. That's right. Just flew in. My arms are tired. So, pleasure to be with everybody on Facebook, YouTube, and of course in the sanctuary. My booming voice this morning, maybe a little bit lower, Mr. and Mrs. Sound Booth. Thank you. Truly a joy and an honor to get started this morning. We're going to be exploring more of an introspective path today in our talk and our journey. And we're going to be looking within the yogic tradition, within Buddhism. And what we're going to be looking at is basically a depth psychology, because they were the masters of depth psychology before we even knew of such a thing in the West. And what basically we're going to be seeing is that as we begin to turn attention onto the nature of our own consciousness, and we begin to look inward through this quieting technique and ways that will be pointed out as we go along, we begin to behold something quite unusual, that we are plugged into a deeper structure of reality. And this deeper structure is hidden in plain sight. And so within the Vedantic tradition, the yogic tradition, the ancient Indian tradition, they basically summarize it within a three-tier kind of a thing, where it's the individual, right, you, me, individuals, nature or universe, and then the transcendent, or you could say, soul, cosmos, and divinity. So it's that kind of a three-tier system that is hidden in plain sight. So when we begin to turn our attention on the individual, we begin to unveil these hidden understandings, these deeper intuitions that begin to clarify the confusion of being in nature and completely oblivious to the divine. So the depth psychology of yoga and Buddhism basically is an unveiling process, yes? And as we unveil, we begin to understand that we were behaving in such a way that kept us from understanding who we truly were, and we were acting in a way that was antithetical, opposite to our true nature. And so we'll see how all of this plays out. It's going to be, I think, a fun times indeed. Okay? So before we dive in, let's relax into the quiet center, within the breath, within the heart. Om. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. So that mantra, Om Shanti, 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 is how the great Upanishads begin and end. These are the revealed text of the most ancient strata of the East Indian religion, maybe the most ancient revelation on the planet, some would say. And the Upanishads basically are saying Om is the sound of the universe, that everything has a very subtle sound, and Om is the core vibration of all life. And in the Mandukya Upanishad, they actually have Om in its three-letter spelling, A-U-M. And this also corresponds to what we were saying earlier, that you have the outer manifestation, the material energy of Prakriti or nature. You have the internal energy of the perceiver, the intellect, the ego, the senses of action and knowledge. And then you have the witnessing state, which is preceding all of the machinery of the internal and the external energies, right? That perceiver is the awe that goes at the back of the throat. The ooh is the subtle vibratory force of mind manifestation. And then is the finality within the manifestation of gross material reality. Now, behind all of that, it says in the Mandukya Upanishad, is the fourth state, right? You have the three. You have the gross, the subtle, and the causal or witnessing energy or witnessing self. But then you have what's called the Turiya, the fourth, and that is beyond all manifestation, the transcendent. And the Shanti, Shanti, Shanti basically means peace within the three worlds. The three worlds, the individual, right? So may I have Shanti, peace from disease, from ill fortune, from trouble in my relationships, finances, whatever impacts me individually, may there be Shanti. May I always have Shanti on the individual level, my personal life. May I also have Shanti within the natural world, viruses, colds, earthquakes, natural disasters. May there be Shanti in that realm as well, in my experience, for all beings. And may there also be Shanti in the Daiva realm, which is the realm of the cosmic forces, the seen and the unseen movements of angelic and archangelic energies, planets, star alignments, astrology, etc. So may there be peace at all of these levels, and may I always be tuned to Om, the inner sound that connects me to the heart of creation. As Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, I am the monosyllable mantra Om. I am manifesting all beings. All beings reside in me. They emanate from me and they return to me. And we're going to see how that plays out a little more fully later on. But this idea of already being the manifestation of God and having our eyes veiled is kind of where we all start, right? It's kind of where we are. We are not consciously or always aware, let's say, of this deeper nature that is hidden in plain sight. And so I wanted to explore the obscuring factors that go into why we're not presently fully attuned to our own deepest nature and our own higher self. And so to do that, we're going to look, like I said, at the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, because he lays out a really great depth psychology to have us look at ourselves. It's actually, if you ever heard of Kriya Yoga, Patanjali has his version of Kriya Yoga in the second pada or chapter of the Yoga Sutras. He says that the Kriya Yoga is tapasya, swadhyaya, and ishvara pranidhana, right? Need I say more? Tapasya basically means to burn off all of the impurities in thought, speech, and action, to elevate ourselves into a more virtuous expression of life. May we brighten rather than dull our life. Tapasya means to burn, to purify, to raise the vibration or heat, right? So that's really the first kriya, or the first action to begin to attune. And then the second one Patanjali lays out is swadhyaya, which is study yourself. Look deeply within yourself. Begin to notice how your personality works, how you react and interact with people. Watch yourself. Watch what you say to yourself. Watch how you react when others say what they say. What's triggering you? How are you projecting your shadow? How do you feel vulnerable? How do you find yourself, finding joy? Is that virtuous or non-virtuous joy? Are you more, having proclivity to the wholesome or the unwholesome expressions of your activities and behaviors? What makes you you? Watch, investigate, study yourself. Swadhyaya. And then there's Ishwara Pranidhana. Ishwara is the divine. According to the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, Ishwara is the guru of all gurus. It's the aspect of God in the cosmos that guides all conditioned souls back to their origin. Ishwara, according to the Yoga Sutras and the greater Vedantic literature, is the God that resides within all beings, never fell into Maya or delusion, and can bestow this grace of instantaneous enlightenment or samadhi if we devote ourselves to Ishwara. So Ishwara Pranidhana is the third kriya for Patanjali, and that means do everything in the service of God. Live to serve God by serving all, right? Love all, serve all. And so by seeing God in all beings, you are devoting your life to Ishwara Pranidhana. You're devoting every act, every thought, every word into the service of the divine. And when you do that, you bring yourself fully into your true nature, right? So these are the three kriyas, and Patanjali then says in the next verse of the Yoga Sutras, after the kriyas, is the kriyas are there to attenuate, to burn off, to clarify, to unveil these obstacles or obscuring factors. Actually, the Sanskrit klesha actually means something more like tormentors. And what are these tormentors or these obstacles to enlightenment, according to Patanjali? Well, you have 5. You have the fundamental ignorance, avidya. And this ignorance means that we are actively ignoring our true nature. Avidya means not knowing, but it means more than not knowing. The scholars and commentators on the Yoga Sutras play with this. In Sanskrit grammar, avidya doesn't mean not knowing. And they use an example. Mitra is a Sanskrit word for friend. Amitra doesn't mean non-friend. It means enemy. So what it's basically saying when we say that the first klesha or obstacle is avidya, it means there's a part of our nature that is actively willing to veil ourself from our true nature, our true being, our spirit. And so that is the beginning of the obstacles. And it's like the soil, Patanjali says, out of which everything else starts to grow, all the other obstacles. So we have avidya, the soil, and the first sprout coming out of avidya is ego, asmita. And ego is the I am that is literally an outgrowth of I'm not my real self. I am something other than my real self. You see? So this is the product of ignorance. The asmita or ego is the product of ignorance. It grows out of the soil of ignorance. And then from this false perspective of self, we have passion, desire, lust, attraction, and hatred, aversion, disgust. These are the 2 ways that the ego operates. It does it at the level of an amoeba. Like if you look at an amoeba, it has some things that are totem or food and other things that are taboo, and it's poison. Everything is working off of totem and taboo. I don't like, right? So the ego is operating on that polarity. And so everything that has value, meaning, definition, reality, good and evil for the ego is, I like it or I don't like it. It's always based on what Jesus in the Course calls a sliding scale of desire. So the ego is full of illusory, false values that serve its needs and wants and desires, and that's why it is running away from the reality. It wants its own needs met. It doesn't want reality on realities. It can't exist in reality. It has to exist in its illusory dream. So those ideas of the attraction and the aversion are the next two kleshas. So now we're up to 4, right? Patanjali says there are 5 obstacles. The 5th and final obstacle is identification with the body. So these are the 5 obstacles that are blocking us from our true nature, right? And through Kriya, through these sacred actions of purifying your thoughts, your speech, your actions, right? Tapasya, burning away, going, seeing what is unwholesome and stopping that and doing what is wholesome. You're going to create friction because you're going to have to go against your habit patterns, your conditioning, what other people expect you to do. That's going to create heat. You're going against the grain of the norm that has kept you in this false rut of the ego self, right? But then you're also studying yourself. So you're watching, like, who am I hanging out with? What programs am I watching? What food am I eating? What am I drinking? What am I tolerating in my relationships? How am I letting other people use or misuse me? Right? You begin to really get a deeper value for yourself and others, and you won't tolerate lacks of love for yourself or others. That also is something that begins to deeply cultivate in self-study. And then you're recognizing the divine in all beings. All of that, like Patanjali says, begins to attenuate or minimize or lighten up those obscuring factors or obstacles. So in his commentary on the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, Swami Satchidananda has something very nice for all of us to listen to. And he talks about, in this little bit that we'll read, avidya, right? So this is the ignorance that is the basis of all the obstacles. And it says in this 4th verse of the Yoga Sutras, 2nd chapter, ignorance is the field for the other kleshas. Whether the other kleshas are dormant, feeble, intercepted, or sustained. Now this will all get clear in a moment. So in other words, we're in ignorance when we're embodied. And we all have these obscuring factors of ego, attraction and aversion, and attachment or identification with the body. But these factors can be, like we're saying, dormant, feeble, intercepted, or sustained, and this is what it means. Here's Satchidananda's commentary. In a baby, we see an example of the first category, that is, they're dormant. When you see a baby, you feel how innocent she is. That seems to be so, but as the baby matures, her inborn disposition will emerge. She will not remain innocent. Ignorance and the other obstacles dormant in her mind will come to the surface at the proper time. They were there the whole while, like seeds or potentials, waiting for the causes and conditions to be right for them to manifest. Right? Latent, but there. To our physical mind, our surface mind, we just see the innocent baby. We don't see the kleshas or the obstacles there yet, but they are just dormant. Then he says, the mind of an advanced yoga practitioner is an example of the second type, that is, when the obstacles are feeble or attenuated. Such a person is not completely free of the kleshas, right? Still embodied, still identified as a separate self, still has likes and dislikes, And yet, they are in his or her mind in a very subtle trace form. They have sunk to the bottom of the mental lake, and out of disuse have become very weak. No longer identifying as your separate self. Remember, devotion to God or to the divine, service to all, makes your likes and your dislikes more universalized. So you're not so selfishly motivated. You're not trying to, get stuff from people and see everything for what's in it for me, right? So that begins to attenuate that ego desire of selfishness, and you begin to open and expand your point of view into that more enlightened perspective. So all of these obstacles begin to really thin out and go further and further down into the bed of the mental lake. Then he says, the third state of intercepted development is seen in the mind of a beginning practitioner. So this is where most of us would fall in. The obstacles are temporarily pushed down by the constant practice of virtuous qualities such as love, truthfulness, discipline, cheerfulness, etc. Right? So you're cultivating virtue, cultivating mindfulness, cultivating the morality and the ethics that would basically align you to the oneness and the unity of life, honoring life, protecting life. And as a result, we intercept the influence of the obstacles of ego, selfish living, and attachment to bodily life. You see? Virtue, cultivation of virtue, is a necessary stage in the development of an enlightened mind. How we treat others, keeping our word, doing what we said we would do, having integrity. All of this is literally spiritual money, spiritual economy. And we cultivate merit or virtue that literally feeds our practice. When we act unwholesome or unvirtuously, don't keep our word, break our commitments, mistreat, gossip, whatever that is, we literally leak out our spiritual vitality. And then it's harder to get into that place of witnessing, clear seeing, deep introspection, because we're leaking out through non-virtuous thoughts, words, and actions. And then God seems so far away, unattainable, impossible. And the unvirtuous things seem so near and dear now. We actually begin to crave the non-virtue. We seek to embody the non-virtue if we keep leaking out. Because then the ego can then take a firmer root in our mind. So in those that are beginning to practice, we cultivate virtue. And he says here on those lines, if such a seeker is not careful to cultivate these qualities, even for a few days, the obstacles will immediately come to the surface. Right? Right? And then we back to practicing, not making ourselves guilty, wrong, or bad, but watching swadhyaya, self-study, right? What did I just do? Why am I out of alignment now? Was that really worth it, what I just did? Did that really give me the pleasure that I thought it would give me? No, because now I feel really cut off from my deeper life. I don't have that lightness and that feeling of connection to grace right now. This wasn't worth it. So deep introspection will show you how you can always, re-navigate and set your course again. Just, to beat yourself up for it will just keep taking you off course. And then finally here on the fourth type, which is the sustained. The kleshas, this is for the average people. The kleshas are a constant. I am my body. What are you talking about? Who else would I be? I am my story. I am my likes and my dislikes. They really matter. right? My individual and my collective, my team, my country, my family. This is me and mine. That's what's the ultimate reality here. That's the sustained perspective of being identified in the kleshas, the obstacles, the tormentors. So the kleshas will constantly manifest in this condition. Every minute, the mind of the average person is affected by the obstructions. They have no say over them. That's really important to get. It's not freedom. See, we have a really skewed idea of freedom. Freedom is sense indulgence, self-indulgence, do what you want now. Who cares about tomorrow? If you like that guy's wife, take her. It's all about you and your pleasure, right? That is not freedom, according to this depth psychology. That's enslavement. It's enslavement to your passions. You have no control over these basic primordial impulses. You're just driven by appetite. That's not freedom. That's having a hook in your nose. So they have no say over these obstacles because they are not exerting any force to control them, right? Not practicing the kriyas, right? Burning up, purifying, introspection, and opening to the divine. You with me so far? Yes, good. All right, so our next journey into the kleshas I find very helpful. This is the first of 3 books in the series, The Path of Individual Liberation. So, Volume 1 by Chogyam Trungpa. This is the profound treasury of the ocean of Dharma. And what he's basically laying out here is the Theravadan or the Hinayana vehicle of Buddhism, which was that first wave of Buddhism that the historical Buddha taught. And that was the path of individual liberation. And according to the Buddhist Dharma, you have to do this swadhyaya. You have to do this deep introspection, right? Calm the mind and then examine the mind. See what the mind is made up of. And no longer be a victim to these impulses, but learn to master them, right? Cultivate mindfulness. And so Chogyam Trungpa has a really great take on the kleshas that I just want to share with you guys here. And it's in the chapter entitled The Snowballing of Deception. So this is what he says this. Let me start before I read by saying that and he does a really expert job on saying it this way, the kleshas, all 5 of them that we just described, right? Ignorance of your true nature, being identified as the separate self, and then being ruled by the passions, the likes and the dislikes of the separate self, and being totally bought in that you're the physical body and afraid to die. That is the klesha complex, you might say, right? And Chogyam Trungpa says he calls all of that basic anxiousness. So when you're identified as this, you don't know yourself, and you're identified as the embodied conditioned being. You're basically anxious, yeah? What happens if you go to check your bank account on your computer or your phone and it's wiped out? Or you get a phone call and your loved one's in the hospital. Just underneath the surface is this basic anxiety. You can't get to your appointment on time and the lights are turning red. It comes up. It's always there. It's just latent. When the causes and conditions are right, you're going to tap into what's that flowing river underneath the surface mind, and that is the kleshas. And that is basic anxiety. So in order to rectify, right, clear up, correct, be free of basic anxiousness, we create heavy-handed situations, right? So we're trying to fix the problem. through these heavy-handed situations. We come up with intense aggression. We come up with intense passion. We come up with intense pride. We come up with what are known as the kleshas, the conflicting or confused emotions, which entertain our basic anxiety and exaggerate it altogether. We do all sorts of things because of that basic anxiety. And because of that, we begin to find ourselves in more trouble and in more pain. Right? Try to solve it from the ego's perspective, and you just compound the problem. Never get rid of the basic anxiety. As the afterthought of expressing our aggression and lust, right? Remember those two ways that the ego shows up? After expressing our aggression and lust, we find ourselves feeling bad. And not only do we feel bad, but we feel more anxious. Right? So it's like, okay, that guy gave me the wrong look, or he said something to my wife, and I'm pissed, and I'm going to punch him in the face. And then we get into a brawl. And now I got to think in the back of my mind, he's coming for me. You know, he'll probably follow me or find me, and I got to look over my shoulder now for how long, I don't know. But it's coming. There's going to be something coming for me that's going to cause me some major upset or pain. So by acting with aggressiveness to solve the problem, I just compounded the problem. I made it worse, right? That's through aggression. Another example is through lust, right? You think you want something or someone, and you finally get that person, maybe, you know, again, through an infidelity or something like that, and it just blows back on you. You never actually have the peace of mind. You never rid yourself of the basic anxiety. It gets worse. Now the wife is calling your place of employment, or, you know, who knows? It just gets nasty. And that's trying to fix the basic anxiety through the remedies suggested by the ego. Right? Do your own self-study to see how that's been showing up in your life. We might feel better at the time if we strike out with our particular flair or style, but then there is a tremendous letdown and tremendous pain. We feel funny about it. In fact, we feel wretched. Not only that, but we make other people feel wretched as well. We can't just practice passion, aggression, and ignorance on ourselves alone. We do it to somebody else as well. And someone always gets hurt. So instead of just having our own anxiety, we produce a further state of anxiety in others. We generate their anxiety, and they also generate it themselves, and we end up with what is known as the vicious cycle of samsara. Everybody is constantly making everybody else feel bad. Right? So again, another example of what he was just saying. Let's say, God forbid, you have a child or a sibling, a parent who's addicted to drugs, and they're thinking by going and getting the prescription or getting high that they're going to solve their anxiety. And yet it drags you in. You're now vulnerable to their situation. And so what he's basically saying is we never are doing this to ourselves alone. We're never alone in experiencing the effects of our acting, our thinking, and our speaking. We're all interdependent. So when we act from the basic anxiety, we're actually bringing people into that with us. We're strengthening it. So the reverse is true. As you begin to attenuate and free yourself up from this, you begin to bring people into a greater sense of themselves, a clearer connection to their spirit, a sense of calm and peace. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So it's important that we recognize as we go through this conversation, we are doing the Kriya practice of Patanjali, that we are doing this, turning about in our mind. We're no longer wanting to identify with the habitual patterns of staying separate in the present moment. And that's going to create some friction or heat within our thoughts. We want to begin to redirect our thoughts. And what's interesting about Patanjali, he says that thoughts have two qualities. They are klishta, there's that root word again, klishta, klishta, and aklishta. So your thoughts are either reinforcing the kleshas, or your thoughts are liberating you from the kleshas. Each thought you have has the marker of what it's representing. Are you compounding feeling bad and making others feel bad? Whether you know it or not, it's being transmitted telepathically. We're all connected. Even though the physical senses don't show us, we're in an ocean. We're all waves connected to this oneness of the ocean. And we're all radiating mutually what we are inside, outside. And so we're all breathing everybody's mind. So when your mind is attuning to the aklishta thoughts, those are thoughts that are wholesome, loving, virtuous, kind, directing towards the divine. And you begin to liberate yourself. You begin to have this, perspective where you're not the body. You're not your passions. You're not your personality as this separate individual self. You can actually watch that. You're the witness. This is where we go in our next phase of the journey. We're about to take another quantum leap. So we just identified with the embodied individual, right? Remember that? The individual, the cosmos, and the transcendent is what we're talking about. Well, the individual within the cosmos, in the ordinary state, is covered with Maya, with delusion. It is a separate wanderer, right? The wandering in samsara. And if you look again within the Buddhist iconography, we talk about this on occasion. You may have seen Yamaraj, the god of death, holding the wheel of life in Buddhist iconography in his claws. He's got his claws on his feet and his claws on his hands, and he's gripped to this wheel. And in the center of the hub of the wheel, you have the pig, the rooster, and the snake. And there you have it. You have the delusion, or avidya, ignoring your true self, the pig. Then you have the rooster and the snake. Once you are in delusion, you're now chasing after things with lust or aggression, defending or attacking, or desiring and attacking. That's at the center of the wheel. And then you have all of the different migrations that you can go into, upper worlds, lower worlds, hell worlds, but all because you're in delusion, ignoring the self. So what the Buddhists are basically saying then is, in order to get off of the wheel, you got to take the veils off of yourself. So that's where we are now, by witnessing your personality as the ego, your likes and your dislikes, your attachment to the body, everything that you've been habitually identified with in the world, the way that you've been showing up in your relationships, all of that becomes increasingly clear. And at the same time, you realize, oh, so that's the character doing what it does. That's not me. I'm actually the witness of that. So that first severance needs to take place on the spiritual path. That happens by cultivating virtue, by cultivating insight, by right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood. You begin to actually take your seat as the witness. You set up the conditions to be the witness by starting where you are. That's why virtue and ethics and morals has a critical place when you're still so embedded as the ego. That's your lifeline, to start acting virtuously, ethically, with integrity. Be your word, keep your commitments. This gives you the lifeline to your witnessing state. You're no longer being pulled by the nose by your passions, your likes and your dislikes. You're now disidentifying with that limiting belief, that klishta-vritti. So now as the witness, you're in an increasingly interiorized state of awareness that can actually get so deep that you literally like watch the universe just go to a pinpoint and you're done. And that's nirvana. Right? That is the goal of the individual path of the Theravada tradition. Individual liberation. You so identify with that stable witnessing self that you no longer are in the world. You no longer want the world. The world is a detestable place to be in. You reject it, right? And it goes further and further out, and then it blips out. And that of the world, that blowing out of the candle, which is literally what nirvana is you blow out embodiment. You no longer take a body. You're no longer identified as the ego. That is the witnessing or the Buddhic understanding. But that is not the end of the story. Remember, the Chogyam Trungpa has it within the Buddhist tradition of Tibet, but we're going to be looking at it within the Vedantic tradition of the Bhagavad Gita in a moment. So get ready. You excited? What you have going on here is, yes, the path of individual liberation is really important. Cultivating virtue, cultivating insight, and getting to the place of detachment, where you can enter what Buddha called in the Four Noble Truths, nirodha. You stop, you cease compounding your ignorance. You take down the scaffolding of the false self. You're done. You're done with the self and you're done with the world. And now you want to abide in your true nature, right? But that's the individual path. In the Tibetan tradition, that then goes through a next phase of Mahayana where you recognize the collectivity of all beings. All beings, not just you, everybody needs to be liberated. So wisdom and compassion to act in the world now. So you've cleared off the mirror of your awareness. You're no longer deluded. You're awake. You're Buddha. Now you act in the world from that place. But you're seeing all beings as the Buddha. And therefore your guidance is coming from that deeper wisdom, not the likes and dislikes of the ego. This is where we get messed up. We're trying to, be virtuous, but oftentimes it's just because, our ego is getting on board with the spiritual program, and we overcomplicate things, we exhaust ourselves, we give to the wrong people. Who's done that? Right? Some people need to crash before they can heal. And if you keep giving to them and they get numb, and you're always there to pull them out, it's oftentimes a deterrent for their own better path, their own good. So that's why the ego can't be the director of the actions. That deeper self has to come into play. And then finally, what we're going to look at now is that that individual liberation, where you then become the witness of all things in that stillness, there is something beyond that. Okay? And that's where the Bhagavad Gita picks up. So this is in chapter 15 of the Bhagavad Gita. And Krishna speaking in the first person here. An eternal part of me enters into the world assuming the powers of action and perception and a mind made of nature. When the divine self enters and leaves a body, it takes these along as the wind carries a scent from place to place. using the mind, ears, eyes, nose, and the senses of taste and touch, the true self enjoys sense objects. The deluded do not see the self when it leaves the body or when it dwells within it. They do not see the self, capital S, enjoying sense objects or acting through the qualities of nature. But they who have the eye of wisdom see. Right? This is that still point of being the witness. We begin to see beyond the veils of the ordinary mind. And this is where we want to finish here with the Gita. Entering into every heart, I give the power to remember and understand. It is I again who take that power away. All the scriptures lead to me. I am their author and their wisdom. In this world, there are two orders of being, the perishable, separate creature, and the changeless spirit. But beyond these, there is another, the Supreme Self, the Eternal Lord, who enters into the entire cosmos and supports it from within. So this is where we want to go in our story, and I think it's very helpful in our spiritual walk in general. We start out as identified with the world, right? Krishna just said there is that natural self that's in the flux and the change of the natural world, right? Embedded in it as the ego. Most are wholly identified with the kleshas within that embodied existence. As we begin to get the itch to wake up and get on the spiritual path, we cultivate virtue, meditate, act kindly, lovingly, start doing things to alleviate our selfishness, basically. And that opens up more and more to that deeper spirit within, which is the imperishable nature that we are, the witness, changeless, not even attached to nature. In the Gita, it's actually called Brahman, or the Purusha. It's the person, the real you, not the part you're playing on TV or in the video game, but the real you. But then Krishna says something very important, and that is, he's the Para Purusha, or the Purushottama, the supreme person. So beyond the stillness of nirvana, this is what he's saying, beyond nirvana, there is the supreme, where if you were to realize that, you would see that the transcendent, the cosmos, and the individual are all my energies. That is total integration. That is remembering God. Then there's no reason to get out of the world. God's here. God is showing up everywhere. God is in every atom. God is in every breath. God fills everything and transcends it at the same time. But as long as we're the ego embedded in the kleshas, we're driven by our desires and our lusts and our fears. We can't comprehend that, nor do we want to, because then the ego would go away. But when we're done with the ego and we start cultivating our virtue, and we want to rest in our spirit and remember who we are, we get still, we detach, we go quiet. And we begin to see that we were the self before time. Nothing in the world can alter or change us. We are the akshara, as we just read in the Gita, the imperishable, not identified with perishable things. And it says, again, in these teachings, that we go into the eternal effulgence. This is, again, the Brahmajyoti, the eternal effulgence of God is the impersonal. And this is where a lot of non-dualist traditions stop. They extinguish Maya. Maya's bad, get out of the world, right? Leave it all behind. Don't come back. That's not the full teaching. The impersonal is a part of God, but not the totality of God. Because what we're going to see is that the fact that we have personhood, hey Mike, right? You're a person, and I actually feel that at your core. There's something universal and singular about being a person. Everyone can identify as their personhood. With the ego identity, it's obscured, it's diluted, but you're still a person, even though you're a deluded person. It's just the person in delusion. When those delusions are cleared, you're now the spiritual person. And because you have that individual personhood, and so does everyone else, the Gita says it's because there's a supreme person who knows every person as himself. And that's the full picture when we come back into right relationship. That we have personhood because it was a bestowal of grace. And then we can recognize that each one of us is an individual and simultaneously the totality in God. So these are the 3 steps I hope we're getting clear on today. Total embeddedness, ignorance in the world, covered by the kleshas, totally obscured, identified as your body, identified as your appetites and your fears, completely asleep, lost, wandering in samsara. Then the truth begins to dawn ever so slightly, and we want it, we seek it, and we start burning away the old crap, stopping those dysfunctional, toxic habits, and we begin to do deep introspection, right? The second Kriya of Patanjali. And then we begin to realize, in order to have what I want, which is my enlightened nature, I need to love and serve all, because they are all part of God. Ishvara Pranidhana. That gets us through the gate into the akshara, into the imperishable self. Nirvana. Liberation. But then the inner heart of the spiritual being can open into divine love. Because at the core of reality is the Purushottama, the supreme being, where now love relationship is the core. Devotion, knowledge is the core. And so we actually begin to embrace everything and everyone, seeing it now as an expression of God. And this is where we'll end today. And we're going to use Sri Aurobindo's essays on the Gita. If you're not familiar with Sri Aurobindo, my man. Okay, so let's see where we want to go. Let's say here. There is a spirit here at work in the world that is one in innumerable appearances. It is the developer of birth and action, the moving power of life, the inhabiting and associating consciousness in the myriad mutabilities of nature. It is the constituting reality of all this stir in time and space. It is itself time and space and circumstance. It is this multitude of souls in the worlds. It is the gods and men and creatures and things and forces and qualities and quantities and powers and presences. It is nature, which is power of the spirit, and objects, which are its phenomena of name and idea and form, and existences, who are portions and births and becomings of this single, self-existent spiritual entity, the One, the Eternal. But what we see, obviously at work before us, is not this Eternal and his conscious Shakti, but a nature which in the blind stress of her operations is ignorant of the spirit within her action. Right? So then he's going to go into what we have been talking about all morning, how we have to extricate ourselves from the blind action of nature. And then we conclude with this. The Gita finds it in its supreme vision of the Purushottama, right? The supreme, beyond even your Brahman or your divine self. There is the self of yourself, what Jesus would call the Father, even though he's the Son and Creator, right? That's the idea. There's even one that, the Son of God, who is the cosmic Creator, bends the knee to. Right? This is the idea. This is the supreme person. For that is the type, according to its doctrine, of the complete and highest experience. It is the knowledge of those who know the whole. It is the immutable self of all, and the immutable self of all is the supreme person. The supreme person is at the same time greater than the imperishable self or spirit, because he is more than this immutability, and he is not limited even by the highest eternal status of his being. So to finish here, basically is, you don't have to run away from nature, but that is a major step before the fullness is reached. You have to get out of being who you're not, and no longer led around by your nose with the passions and the fears. So you're going to rest in your nirvanic state, but that's not the end. The cake isn't baked yet. Opening up to the love of what is beyond even the imperishable state reconnects you back into the cosmic play. And then you can delight in it. And that is actually the Vajrayana. That is the path of total integration, or Tantra. That is the third and final volume of Chogyam Trungpa's teachings on the treasury of Dharma. Hope that wasn't too boring or difficult of a ride for you guys. Blue bag's going to go around. If you have any questions, let me know. We recognize the divine is the giver, the gift, and to whom it is given. And so we bless it in that sacred understanding, the whole truth of what is truly here and now. And so it is. Amen. We good? All right, let's seal the deal. Find that beautiful diamond shining within the center of the heart. And just for a moment, surrender everything into that empty, quiet, still space of your diamond nature. And feel that diamond light as the light of your own naked awareness. And in this state of true rest and repose and surrender, we know that the light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us, and the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is. Amen. Love and serve all, my friends. Thank you so much. Course of Miracles tomorrow night, 7:15 p.m.